Good morning to everyone. I would ask you to take your seats so we can start. Thank you very much.
Good morning everybody, bonjour à vous tous, bon dia, buenos dias, buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning.
Ambassadeur de nos partenaires africains aux représentants des associations.
Like to give the floor and welcome.
Accepter notre invitation.
So I want to thank all those who have accepted.
From the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, all our panelists and the representatives of the main multilateral development banks of the African continent. Allow me now my mother tongue.
Africa is a strategic priority for the Italian government and for my term as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. And the presence of many people here at the Foreign Affairs Ministry proves how successful this meeting is, because the interest shown by Italian and African enterprises, by African countries involved with our ministry, is a key element that allows us to hope for the future. It bodes well for the future. Today's event is a stage in the cooperation that we intend to consolidate, the cooperation between Italy and the African continent. I have always firmly believed in this privileged relationship we have, because I am absolutely convinced that African peoples want to reach out to us, want to reach out with their hands, because they know us, because we know them, because we are the natural interlocutors. Many areas of the Italian territory are actually closer to Africa than to the Italian capital, Rome. So you can imagine what kind of approach, what kind of mentality, what kind of mindset Italy has, which is a mindset that is similar to that of African peoples, in particular those of North Africa. We are absolutely convinced that we must look to the African continent through the African lens, not through the Italian lens. So from an African standpoint. And we are ready to shake hands with the African peoples that reach out to us, that expect participation, an Italian participation in economic activities and initiatives. But not only that, because we can set up joint ventures, that's true, but we can work in a number of sectors. I'm thinking of outer space. I'm thinking of healthcare. I'm thinking of the agricultural sector, scientific sector, science and research. We cannot talk about economic relations in an isolated fashion, as if they were not an integral part of a broader view of the relations between Italy and the African continent. I am a great advocate. I strongly support the birth of mixed society, especially when it comes to raw materials. We are a manufacturing country. We are the second manufacturing economy in Europe. But since we are an industrial country, we need raw materials. Africa is rich in raw materials, and I think we can come up with agreements which are win-win solutions, because I think we can extract raw materials and attain products from raw materials through the transformation, the processing of these raw materials in Africa through African labor, African manpower. And we can field our expertise, our know-how. So, resorting to African labor, this would allow both partners of the mixed company, mixed enterprise, to have economic benefits. This would be beneficial to employment as well in the African continent, and it would allow us, industrial companies, to have crucial raw materials to gain industrial competitiveness. All these elements are part of this privileged relationship we would like to have with the African continent, and that has been confirmed in the Italy-Africa summit that was held in January in Rome, attended by a number of heads of governments and states from the African continent. And I would like to say that the new economic partnership with Africa, a four-way economic partner with Africa, can mark the beginning of this new season, which we have dubbed the Mattei Plan, which must be part of a broader European Marshall Plan, which must contribute to the growth of the African continent, surely an economic growth. I worked a lot in this regard when I was Commissioner for Industry and Commissioner for Transport. For example, I believe that we should work on the interconnection between European and African networks through sea highways, maritime highways, because if we lack transportation networks, it will be difficult to boost the competitiveness of our enterprises, whether they are African or Italian. I believe that the African continent has huge potential, and its industrial and entrepreneurial sector is already strong, is already a quality sector, and I believe that Italian and African private sectors can cooperate to foster development in both Italy and the African continent. So we want to enhance our relationships. We want more Africa in our enterprises, and it is not by chance that the general state of Italian enterprises have included young African entrepreneurs that are graduating from the Italian University of Foreigners in Perugia. These are foreign students, Africans, who speak fluent Italian, and they can truly act as a bridge between Italian and African enterprises. These youths can already work in our enterprises. They can represent Italian companies in their country of origin because they are aware of the local context, because they speak the local language as well as Spanish, Portuguese, English, or French, depending on their second language, aside from the local language of the African country. And this is an extremely important element. Indeed, the very day that we introduced these students, 5 or 6 were immediately hired by Italian enterprises because they needed this professional profile, this skilled professional profile. So relations between universities, too, is paramount. Research, cooperating in research and the university, in the field of university, means employing and resorting to properly trained youths that are well aware of the mechanisms that exist in our country, and they are perfectly aware of the mechanisms that exist in their country of origin. I think that the data we currently have is positive because in a context of a slowdown of international trade, our trade has reached 60 billion, it's worth 60 billion euros. That's just slightly down compared to the previous year. This was affected by the high costs, energy costs that was triggered by the war in Ukraine. This means that our trade is already solid and we can do even more. There is great potential. There are great opportunities in strategic sectors such as energy and physical and digital infrastructure, agriculture and manufacturing sector. I mentioned at the beginning of my speech outer space. I dealt with it personally a lot when I was European Commissioner because I think that the outer space industry can be an industry that looks to the future and that should be given due value and enhanced in order to further develop sectors such as the fight against climate change and agriculture. There are vast areas in some African countries, and this especially goes for this. And in Malindi, there is a Brosio facility, and I think we can put these experiences to good use, serving a common agricultural policy. I think that even human resources are crucial. And I was mentioning this episode of young African students whom I introduced at the meeting on general meeting on Italian exportation. In Italy, too, through this ministry, we assign scholarships that we fund. And I managed to increase the funding for these scholarships for youths that can study in Perugia, who specialize in the study of studying Italian language, so they can surely work in Italian enterprises, but they can also teach the Italian language in the country of origin. This can further favor the inclusion of African workers in our companies. As you know, there is a government decree that envisages the presence of 500,000 foreign workers in Italy. And they come to Italy having a job. Some can be trained in the country of origin. Others can be trained through our embassies and consular offices. And for those who already know the Italian language, well, they can hold even higher offices because they can be integrated straight away. So from this standpoint, I think that human capital, especially the human capital of a continent such as Africa, whose demographic growth is remarkable, so there are a lot of young people who represent the present and the future of our societies and enterprises, and they must be able to look confidently to a possible cooperation with our country. We are working together with a foreign ministry focusing on the diplomacy of growth. The growth of Italy, the growth of Africa. We are working on a package of 200 million euros, envisaging special measures for the African continent, setting up commercial partnerships with 20% of the funds that are not to be returned. We have a hub for internationalization. I thank our representatives of Italian companies, Italian Trade Agency, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, SACE, which is our development bank, for their work. And The Italian Trade Agency has opened new offices in Lagos and Nairobi, and this proves the great Italian interest towards the African continent. Our development bank, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, has opened offices in Morocco, in Egypt, and soon it will open them in sub-Saharan Africa as well. We recently set up a new Italian embassy in Mauritania. This again proves our interest in sub-Saharan Africa, and our agencies supporting Italian investments, CIMIT and SACE, are ever more present in the African continent. We want to encourage Italian enterprises in taking part in development plans for countries such as Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, Senegal, and Morocco. Over the past weeks, I sent a mission to Kenya, Tanzania, and we have a mission that has just come back from Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, and Ghana and Guinea. I have led myself missions in the agri-food sector in Egypt and Tunisia. We believe in Africa. I hope that African countries, African peoples, will believe in Italy more and more. And I hope that this meeting can generate many cooperation opportunities that can further strengthen the friendship between the Italians and Africa. The Mediterranean is the bridge between our country and your countries, between our people and your peoples, between our enterprises and your enterprises. And I think that this sea, the Mediterranean Sea, should become a sea of trade, a sea of development through maritime highways I was mentioning, that can connect the two transcontinental networks. And it should be less and less a sea of death, a cemetery for young Africans who come to Italy and Europe looking for a better future. This hope must not be entrusted to people smugglers. They must be entrusted to states, to enterprises, for the reciprocal benefit, for a reciprocal benefit. I now leave the floor to Ms. Hanan Morsi, and she can further illustrate the positions of the African countries, and I thank her for accepting our invitation and for being in attendance with us to confirm this strong relationship of friendship between the African continent and Italy. Thank you for your attention.
Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Tajani, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here with you in the beautiful city of Rome and to participate in this Italy-Africa business-to-business dialogue. I would like to express my deep appreciation of the Italian government for the warm hospitality and for the invitation to be part of this critical dialogue. Africa is the continent of enormous potential. Africa has the youngest population. As a region, it's the youngest and only getting younger. The median age on the African continent is 19 years. And by 2050, 1 of 4 globally that are in working age population will be African. Africa is also home of about 60% of the global solar potential, and Africa has 60% of the world uncultivated arable land. In addition, Africa is very rich in green minerals, possessing a significant share of the global reserves, including 92% of platinum, 56% of cobalt, 54% of magnesium, and 36% of chromium. However, this huge potential has not translated into benefits to African people. More than 1 in 4 young Africans, about 72 million, are not in employment, education, or training. 2/3 of them are young women. And out of 800 million people globally that don't have access to electricity, 600 of them are actually in Africa. That's more than 40% of our African population. And 2/3 of Africa's existing grids are considered unreliable. Out of 54 African countries, only 10 are not commodity dependent. Among the 44 remaining countries, 16 depend on agricultural products, 17 depend on minerals, and 10 depend on fuels, the price of which are all volatile and vulnerable to shocks. These realities pose huge risks and threats to economic resilience, social cohesion, and intergenerational solidarity, and pathway to sustainable development for Africa. However, they also offer huge opportunities for potential investments. We must realize that potential cannot feed our people, potential cannot eliminate homes, and potential cannot protect countries from the next shocks. What will do so is actually investing in these areas to actually translate these potentials into realities. And what we need is partnerships and real action. That's why dialogues with businesses and private sector, like this one of today, are crucial to tap the potential of Africa, which offers incredible business and investment opportunities. To do so, we also must correct the misperceptions on Africa's risks, build confidence in our institutions, and forge a win-win collaboration together. Only through a paradigm shift for growth and development, we can transform Africa as the continent of potential to the continent of the future. Excellencies, distinguished participants, Italy can be a good partner to Africa's development in all of the 4 thematic areas of today's dialogue, namely energy, digital transformation, agribusiness, manufacturing, and sustainable mobility. We at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa have been working together with member states, partners, and stakeholders in these 4 areas. To give you a few examples, in Madagascar, we team up with the WFP to tap solar potential for rural electrification by reviewing and improving energy regulation, leveraging geospatial and digital tools to optimize the locations of solar power stations. In Zambia and Zimbabwe, we are currently hit hard by severe droughts. And in these countries, we support the planning and preparation of a common agri-industrial park. By introducing harmonized policies and regulations, we could help countries attract investments to move up the value chain in agriculture and reduce food system vulnerability. Across Africa, we also support efforts in scaling up manufacturing capacities for economic diversification and structural transformation. A very interesting initiative that we have is the Battery Initiative for DRC and Zambia, which is a stellar example of ECA initiatives to help countries create more value added, more jobs, and more socioeconomic resilience. We have completed a study on the cost of producing battery precursors in DRC, showing that setting the precursor facility would be 3 times cheaper than it would cost in the US, and producing precursors in the DRC would also reduce emissions, net emissions, by 30% relative to producing it in China or the US. In Morocco, we support the establishment of a regional value chain on e-mobility. In the coming weeks, we will launch a continent-wide virtual training program on electric vehicles to stakeholders, on EV technologies and standards, energy storage, and waste management. In all these efforts, we strive to be the prime think tank and partner of choice for Africa's socio-economic development. Excellencies, distinguished participants, the Metea Plan for Africa, announced by Her Excellency Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni at the Italy Africa Summit 2024, offer great opportunities to deepen our engagement. We could work together on several fronts. First, on policy coordination, Italy is currently the president of the G7, and the African Union has become a full member of the G20. The Economic Commission for Africa is honored to be designated by the African Union as its knowledge partner for the G20 and the only United Nations entity carrying such role. In a world of geopolitical tensions and North-South divide, we must join hands for solidarity so that we can address the issues of worsening debt distress, widening funding gaps for development, rising inequalities, and exacerbating climate shocks. Second, in the areas of de-risking, to make investments happen, it's imperative that we have the correct risk perceptions and effective risk management tools. While ECA keeps advocating for partnerships for Africa and building local capacity for better governance on the continent, Italy has a strong role to play. The Italian Export Credit Agency has grown its exposure to Africa more than 6 times in the past 10 years. I encourage the Italian institutions to work with our multilateral and national development banks, commercial banks, and other financial institutions to crowd in more private sector investments. It's equally crucial that we work together to leverage technology and enhance our statistical systems, to have transparent and effective disclosures and monitoring on our investments. Third, on niche industries. Italy has a dynamic and vibrant private sector and strong niches, particularly in fashion, pharmaceutical, and automobile industries. In Africa, we have talented youth who create world-class music, film, artistic work, fashion, and we have a huge potential for pharmaceutical. Just as an illustration, next week, actually, the Economic Commission for Africa will be hosting a ministerial meeting on our Pan-African pharmaceutical initiative in Mombasa. And all these issues offer huge opportunities for collaboration, and our businesses could certainly work together to forge win-win partnerships that will foster our economic transformation. As we stand at a critical juncture, let us join hands to make the blueprint a reality. I count on everyone for greater partnerships so Africa can truly become the continent of the future and the partner of choice. Investing in Africa is investing in the future. I thank you for your attention.
Ringraziamo il Vice Primo Ministro, il Ministro degli Affari Esteri e della Cooperazione.
We thank the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Deputy Executive Secretary and Chief Economist of Union and ECA, Ms. Hannah Morsi, and the Italian Foreign Affairs Minister Antonio Tajani for opening this session. Now we move on to the first panel of this plenary session. It is extremely important because it addresses the role of the Italian system supporting economic cooperation with Africa. I now leave the floor to the Deputy Chair of Internationalization for Confindustria, Barbara Giacomello. Good morning. Allow me to thank the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Mr. Antonio Tajani, for strongly wanting to set up this event. And I would like to thank all the representatives of the African institutions in attendance, as well as all our entrepreneur friends. Thank you and welcome to Italy. Today's meeting with entrepreneurial associations of African countries, 3 months after the Italy-Africa Summit, highlights how concrete, how tangible we want to make the Mattei Plan, stimulating connections with the Italian industrial system. Confindustria is the association that represents industry and services in Italy, and it features the excellencies of the Italian entrepreneurial fabric. And these realities are always growing in our country. Our companies focus more and more on the cooperation opportunities with Africa, and the African issue has never been as topical as it is now. In a context that, in a global political and commercial context that is still very vulnerable, Africa is a continent that takes on an ever more strategic role for Italy and for all of Europe. This year, according to estimates, 12 of the major world economies in terms of growth will be in the African continent. In 2025, the African population will be 2 billion, and young Africans will represent a crucial element for development, together with youth-related entrepreneurship, which involves startups, incubators, and more. All these factors are part of the framework of the free trade area in the continent of Africa. And this will allow access to a market of 1.3 billion people with GDP of $3.4 billion. And this is a figure that is expected to grow. The impact that may come about in 2025 in terms of industrial production is $1,000 billion and 14 million jobs in several areas. According to the World Bank, the full enforcement of the agreement should lead to an increase in income in Africa of 9% by 2035. And this will allow 50 million people to be lifted out of poverty. Still in 2035, direct foreign investments in Africa are expected to increase by 111% and 159%, whereas wages should rise by 11.2% for women and 9.8% for men. Exportation. Italian export African export to the rest of the world should increase by 32%, and intra-African trade, these exports will increase by 109%. So in the light of all this, Italian enterprises must be part of the transformation of the African continent, where the industrialization will play a leading role, will take center stage. The Italian entrepreneurial fabric can bring a fundamental contribution in terms of know-how, technology, the ability of creating this kind of culture, and from an industrial standpoint, and for the industry-linked activities. And even when it comes to education and training, this is part of what we do when we go to foreign countries. The large industrial groups, the traditional large industrial groups that are already present in Africa, aside from these, there will be more and more small and medium enterprises that work in a number of sectors, ranging from agriculture to processing and transformation, new technologies, pharmaceutics, textile, and more. Despite this trend, there's a lot of potential that has not been put to good use yet, and that part is huge. So Italy must make up for its lack of presence in certain countries. We must do it straight away. There is room for Italian enterprises, for large enterprises, but as I was saying, even for small and medium enterprises that can surely generates a huge potential in terms of relations with the local counterparts. We at Confindustria share what the Italian government is doing in Africa. We agree with their measures, with their policies. We want to promote an innovative and concrete model that can truly meet the economic growth needs in the long run of African countries. So the summit that was held in late January was a success. This proves that a few months on, this is still a success because we're holding another meeting, and this proves how important Africa is to us. And the Mattei Plan wants to give new momentum to a cooperation-based approach, cooperation that is required to strengthen all our industrial partnerships. We're doing this, again, in the medium and long run. It's not a short-sighted measure. Confindustria is part of the control room of the Mattei Plan, and our goal is that of further consolidating the presence and role of Italian enterprises in Africa. Allow me to say, in conclusion, that the framework of the Mattei Plan allows us to identify new measures and tools that can support economic and insurance cooperation, which is necessary for Italian companies that want to invest in Africa. Our funding and the contribution of Italian enterprises aim to set up a local partnership strategy. And I believe that today's meeting can lay the foundations for a fruitful dialogue and long-lasting dialogue with African entrepreneurial associations in order to identify the opportunities and projects we can pursue together. I thank you, and I hope to see you soon.
Ringraziamo la dottoressa Beltrame Giacomello.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Giacomello. I'd like to hand the floor to the President of... is yours. Good morning, good day to all of you. I would like to first of all thank